In this final video, we're gonna see the last part about the rendering in Octane for Blender. So we're going to continue with the scene that we set up earlier, and we're gonna discover more about how we can export all the passes of our render, and also how we can set up our camera and work with additional effects like the field of view and the depth of field. And so we started with a really simple scene and using a really simple technique, which was the HDRI and image-based lighting. We saw how we can do, we can prepare our images for compositing. So we can create, for example, a green screen or a blue screen, or how we can use the alpha channel to get rid of the background, and also how we can play with different effects like this cartoon effect, and also all the other settings concerning the pre-production of the rendering, the parameters to increase and improve the quality, and all the other effects here, the additional effects like emissive materials and the fog, the volumetric lights. And we play a lot with what we can create in the scene in the pre-production. And then we have the parts where we set up the settings of the rendering and the camera. Camera is also going to be really important. And then we move on to the post-production. So we worked on a single subject, which was a car or a building, and we worked with really simple technique for the rendering, which was the HDRI or IBL, image-based lighting. And then we move on. We started to add lights and also effects like the bloom and glare, the vignetting. Now these effects can be achieved through the viewport directly, or can be also set up in the camera. And then we moved into the more complex situation, which is an interior. So exterior is easier because you have direct lighting, and you basically found your lighting on your daylight, which is sunlight and the skylight. But when you are in an interior, first of all, you need to start to add some bounces of the light. Otherwise, the scene will be poorly illuminated. So you need to switch from direct light to something more complex like path tracing or ray tracing. And once you do that, things start to get heavier and heavier, but that's how you get complexity and more accuracy in the lighting. So we added also here some like spotlights for the ceiling, and some pendant lights, and we mixed a little bit the natural light coming from outside with the artificial light coming from the internal devices. Now we also experimented a little bit with other tools like the displacement. We created a terrain using displacement, and using different materials we created a snow, and we used the air and fur to create grass or carpets. So we discovered this additional effect which we can use to create like fur and things like that, and also how we can use the clipping material to clip the architecture and create a section. And then we continued in the interior. This was like the last part of our path, of our learning path. In the interior we have like more things to consider. Essentially we need to take care about many effects. Now we will use also the show Octane viewport in this video because we're gonna study this a little bit more. So we can see right now that I have increased a lot the samples to get a clean effect. And also when we use the Octane viewport, we actually have a better result. Now we can also increase, you can see the information also about your graphic card on the bottom right. We can increase the power or the RAM dedicated to the rendering if we want to increase the timing, if you want to create like faster renderings. And then we have two passes right now. We have the beauty pass, which is the result of the calculation of the rendering. We can also lock the viewport here. And then we have the denoiser pass, because we activated the denoiser in the previous video. Now, when we lock the Octane viewport, you can see that many of the options are grayed out. So that means that you cannot modify the view and the render in those ways. But you have these pickers which are really handy, so you can pick, for example, the white balance, or if you want to balance the rendering and the image, you can get the material, and you can get the focus of the camera, which right now is locked actually. You can also change here the quality. Now we are at the highest quality, and then you have these little buttons for the export. So this is where you can export, whether you're doing an animation or a single image. This is where you set up the file format, and this is PNG right now, and also where you can see the passes that you are working on. So you can see right now it's working on the beauty pass, and you can see here render pass name, and we already saw this panel before. And then we have the denoiser, which hasn't even started. So you can choose if you want to use the denoiser or not, which is going to be like an extra effect on top of what we're doing in the main render. And just as we are working right now with these two, and we can choose to export them in a single file as layers like EXR, or if we want to use a single image for each one of the passes, I can decide it right here, and I can select the format, and then I can export. But what if I want more passes, and what passes are there? Well, we're gonna see that later. Now let's get to the camera before we define the passes. And by the way, in render image here in the render menu in Blender, this is where you can render your image or render your animation. This is basically the exact same as Blender, but instead of using the Blender render engine like Cycles or Eevee, we're gonna use Octane. So that's gonna stay the same, and also the format here. This is where you can set up resolution, the aspect ratio, the frame rate, or FPS if you want like more quality for your animation. And then we have the frame start, the frame end. This is the timeline where we can work with our animation. Now all these topics are covered in the Blender video course, so you may want to have a look at that if you don't know how to use that already. We're gonna focus on the Octane parameters as usual. So right here, what we may need is to activate here the Octane output. And again, this is how you can customize and set up the stuff that you are exporting. So this is again, the Octane part. And this is one part of all the settings. Now we are using the dining room kitchen baked from this author right here from Sketchfab. So just to credit the author, and you can download it, of course. Now in this scene, you have something that is baked into the scene. Some materials, some lights are actually baked in the scene. Now, before we continue, let's do a little bit of theory for those of you who don't know yet. We are going to work with the exposure. Now, exposure in Octane is like a separate thing, but in reality and in other render engine, we have these three really important settings, which is the ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Now, these can be used for adjusting the exposure, but we're going to see that is not the case in Octane. We're just going to find a single parameter, but they are also used for additional effects that we're going to see here. And you must prepare this before you actually run the render. So with the aperture, you can define what is called the depth of field, or the focus and autofocus. With the shutter speed, you can define the motion blur. So this is an animation effect. So you need to have an animation or objects that are animated. So it could be a camera, animated camera, could be an object moving, but you need to have something moving. And depending on how you adjust the motion blur, you're gonna have these like light painting or effects like ghosting effects. And again, depth of field is about the aperture. So